Joe Biden calls for a new era of diplomacy during his speech at the UN. Gabby Petito's body, positively identified as her fiance, remains missing in action. And the most useful features in the new iOS update. Wednesday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Wednesday, September 22nd. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. It's fall, Carlo. I can't believe it. Summer's officially over.
I love this time of the year, Jill, and the weather here in New York has been phenomenal. We'll get another couple of weeks of that before it becomes winter, and we're all depressed again. Just quickly, we got some great feedback on we really sparked a little debate yesterday in our discussion about the imperial versus Fahrenheit temperature systems or metric system. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I don't even know how we started talking about that, but that was a fun discussion. I remain convinced that Fahrenheit and imperial are the way to go over Celsius and metric. And I also just wanted to say that I appreciate you sending me that video of Boris Johnson walking down the street in Manhattan yesterday at the UN. And sort of like as we were talking about, he's just kind of like waltzing down First Avenue with his contingent of bodyguards behind him. I thought that was pretty funny.
Well, because basically the traffic was so bad that he's like, the only way I'm going to get there on time is if I walk, which I think most people who've lived or worked in New York City can relate to.
It's the way to go in New York.
And I was blown away by how smart our podcast listeners are, because those emails just comparing the Fahrenheit versus Celsius, I was like, wow, I really learn something every day.
We got scientists writing in. It's amazing.
All right, let's get to the UN and some of that news that came out yesterday. President Biden delivering his first address to the UN General Assembly since taking office, declaring a new era of American diplomacy for what he called an inflection point in history. Biden defended the chaotic Afghanistan withdrawal and noted that his UN speech marked the first in 20 years that the U.S. was not at war. He also said the country is not looking for a new Cold War. It's thought that he was referring to China, although he did not mention China by name. The president reasserting his support for a two-state solution for Israel and the Palestinians, and committed to rejoining the Iran nuclear deal if Iran does the same.
Oh, God. When he said that, the Iran discourse just drives me absolutely bananas. We reneged on that deal. And then it was Trump who imposed those new sanctions, which led the Iranians to retaliate by increasing their uranium enrichment. If we just dropped those additional sanctions as an act of good faith here, they would go back into compliance, which they had been in for 3.5 years. Biden could do that with the stroke of a pen today.
What's your source on that, Carlo Versano? You're very confident about Iran. I mean, I don't know if it's as simple as, I feel like you have a very black and white view on Iran. I'm not sure it's as simple as that.
Well, no, it's not simple at all. It's like one of the most vexing problems in foreign policy. But it is true that we backed out of the deal that they were in compliance with, and I think that it seems they want to go back to it. I think if we just lifted some of these extra sanctions that makes it impossible to do business, then they would probably go back into compliance. It's also just what he said. It's not really true what he said that we're not at war. I mean, we have boots on the ground still in Iraq and Syria, and God knows where else that we don't even know about. It's just not really right. It's not really symmetrical war. I mean, it's true that we're not really fighting like land wars anymore, but we're still doing stuff, right?
Did you get to watch his speech at all?
I didn't watch it live. Franny and I were at the park, which was much more enjoyable. But I did see it on. I did watch it later on. I thought it was like a good speech, I guess.
So did they have teleprompters? Maybe this is a dumb question, because that was a long speech, and I was just, my mom was asking. She's like, did he memorize that whole speech?
No,
I'm guessing no. And I said, no, obviously not. I'm guessing there was just teleprompters around.
I think so. I do like the UN General Assembly because I like the green marble look. I think that's I think that looks cool.
Okay, Carlos, some troubling numbers about anti-Semitism on college campuses in this country. The Brandeis Center for Human Rights took a survey of Jewish college students, members of the API fraternity and API sorority. 65% say that they had recently experienced or were familiar with acts of anti-Semitism on campus or in virtual campus settings. About 25% say that they have felt unsafe as Jews on campus or virtually, and about 50% say that they have actually felt the need to hide their Jewish identity. I don't know, these numbers to me were really startling, but even more startling was the fact that this survey was conducted in April, which is before the Israel-Gaza conflict sparked even more anti-Semitism. So when I first looked at these numbers, which were just insane to me, I thought, oh, well, they must have been recently or just, immediately following that war. Blake Flayton, he's a young Jewish activist. I guess that's how you would describe him. He wrote about the results. He says, quote, "It's an absolute shame, and what makes it worse is the intentional overlooking of the problem by our peers and administrators who speak constantly about their commitment to progressivism and to diversity and inclusion." He goes on to say, "The message your Jewish peers are receiving reads loud and clear: we do not count." He had written an op-ed about anti-Semitism when he was a student, and he said he lost more friends than I could count. No professors or faculty reached out. No investigations were opened. No statements were made. Sadly, I'm not altogether surprised. I think I was surprised at how high the number actually was, just some of these stats. But just the overall sentiment, I'm not really surprised about at all, actually, which...
Right.
It's just terrible. I don't really know what to say, but I think that is the feeling amongst a lot of Jews right now. It's just this, once again, as we're waking up to systemic racism and problems against so many other marginalized groups, there is this sentiment like that, again, as Blake Flayton said, Jews don't count. I see you don't have much to say, Carlo.
No, Jill. I don't have.
You don't have to comment if you don't want to.
I don't have much to say. And honestly, when we talk about anti-Semitism, I was told. Well, last time we talked about it, I was told by my rabbi buddy that I can't really opine on this because I don't understand it. So I'm going to take his advice, and I'm not going to.
I don't think that that's true.
I don't either, but
I don't. I just wanted to get it on the record because
totally.
No one has covered it, okay? And there's like this whole thing where people in the media always say like, no one in the media is covering it. Well, we're in the media, so I want to cover it. But I wrote it up for our newsletter today, and I was Googling I wanted to link to an article on it. No one covered it. Like literally, maybe a couple of Jewish publications, but other than that, I mean, it's like a non-event. So I think that just once again feeds into this idea where it's lonely, I think, right now for the Jewish community.
I hear you.
And I wanted to personally get on the record with it. Okay, once
that.
Again, some vaccine news that broke yesterday, literally as we were recording the podcast. So that news, if you missed it, is important for the 14 million Americans who got the one-and-done Johnson & Johnson vaccine. J&J saying its trial data shows a second dose of the vaccine given 2 months after the first provides very strong protection against symptomatic COVID, strong enough that it makes that shot comparable to the 2-dose Pfizer and Moderna shots. Meanwhile, the CDC's advisory panel meeting today to decide who should get boosters of the Pfizer vaccine after the FDA's panel recommended them for some high-risk groups. It's the job of the CDC to now decide who exactly counts as high risk.
Did you see the story yesterday about hospitals in Tennessee that are now limiting monoclonal antibody treatments to the just unvaccinated people who come in with severe COVID? Which I don't know. I was sort of struck by this article. I guess it like clinically makes sense, but I don't know. I mean, there's like some fairly interesting ethical complications there, right? If you think about if you got severe COVID because you were immunocompromised, even though you had been vaccinated, and you went to the hospital expecting to get like that Regeneron treatment that is, so effective, and you didn't get it because some guy who thought COVID was like a hoax was getting it. I don't know, man. I would be mighty angry if that happened in my family.
I agree with you. Actually, so I'm not going to divulge who, but somebody I'm quite close with, very high risk, fully vaccinated, got COVID recently, and received the monoclonal antibody treatment. And I think it made a humongous difference for her.
That's what they say, yeah.
And if she had gone, and if they basically denied that to her because she was vaccinated, I mean, I think that's pretty. It's unacceptable.
It's malpractice.
I mean, morally and ethically. Look, it's the same way. By the way, you could actually make the reverse argument and say you didn't take it seriously. We're only giving this to people who are vaccinated, and that would be wrong also. I mean, you have to just treat people who are sick.
Right.
A couple of doctors or epidemiologists who've been opining on the J&J news, they kind of say it's what they thought all along, which is fascinating because it's like if the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was just a 2-dose vaccine,
Right.
would it have just been as good as the 2-dose Moderna or Pfizer vaccines?
In fact, J&J actually even said, they were like, if you actually space the shots 6 months apart, it seems even more effective. So I guess we shall see. So it'll be interesting what the CDC comes out with today.
Some sad news in the Gabby Petito case. The human remains that were found this week in Wyoming are indeed those of Petito, according to the coroner who performed the autopsy. The FBI says that she died by homicide. The cause of death not yet been determined. Authorities in Florida are now resuming the search for Petito's fiance in a swampy wilderness reserve. That's where he told his parents he was going to hike and meditate more than a week ago before he vanished.
Yeah, so many mistakes made in this case. The more I read about it and the more I consume about it, the police who responded to that original 911 domestic disturbance call, they originally treated him, Laundrie, the boyfriend, fiance rather, as the sort of victim in this whole thing. Then, fast forward to after she disappears, he shows up at his parents' house in her van without her in it. And then he's there at the parents' house for more than a week before splitting. So, that bought him a lot of time, right? Who knows what happened in that 10-day period in terms of like disposing of evidence or, cleaning, who knows, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if you see that his parents are eventually charged with obstruction in this. We'll have to see how these, how this plays out here and if they can find him. And even if I don't even know if he's alive, right? But it's just so sad, right?
It's terrible. I watched the body cam video from the police.
Yeah.
At least like this edited down version. And going back now, knowing what we know now, it's so eerie, and I think it's partly what's resonating with so many women, and we've heard from many actually who've emailed us in, who say this just fits unfortunately this pattern that we've grown all too familiar with, in terms of domestic abuse and the way women are treated.
Right.
When you go and you watch that police video and the way that the police treated both her and him, you really see it.
Yeah, and I think law enforcement is just very ill-equipped. It doesn't really have the training in a lot of cases to deal with these to know the signs to look out for in these sorts of situations, right?
Want to do a quick update on the Elizabeth Holmes trial. The proceedings got back underway with an Arizona woman testifying that she took 2 Theranos blood tests from Walgreens that falsely indicated that she had miscarried when she was in fact pregnant. The testimony was the first time in the trial that a patient took to the stand to describe how Theranos' inaccurate finger prick technology had real-world effects on ordinary people. Holmes is facing federal charges that she defrauded patients and investors with claims that Theranos had developed a revolutionary way to test blood.
That was some remarkable testimony. And I have to say, Jill, I give you credit because I was sort of going into this trial almost like I don't really not really that into it or sort of almost empathetic towards her a little bit. But the more I follow it, the more I'm reminded about the John Carreyrou book and the less empathy I have for her for these reasons, showing that. I mean, just imagine that. Imagine if you got a blood test. By the way, that woman had already miscarried like 3 or 4 times. So imagine that. You get that blood test that's telling you miscarried when you're actually carrying a baby. That's just horrific. Just one other thing. I read something about how Warren Buffett actually had her number way from the beginning. He thought that the red flag was all of the big names that she had hired for Theranos' board people who didn't have anything to do with like this kind of technology, right? People like, who was it? David Petraeus, I think, Henry Kissinger. But Buffett had always said like that showed that they prioritized these splashy names over expertise, people who actually knew the business, who had shareholders, interests in minds, right?
That's really fascinating. There are a lot of people, I think, who probably passed up on, investing in this company. A lot, of course, who didn't out of FOMO.
Right.
But no, we're hearing about from whistleblowers as well, who in the company who were kind of just appalled at the way Theranos was cherry picking data that they had presented to investors and to companies. And I think that, you had mentioned early on when we were first talking about it that it felt like maybe sexism. And there was actually this op-ed in the New York Times, it's called The Elizabeth Holmes Trial is a Wake-Up Call for Sexism in Tech, which kind of argued similarly to what you were originally thinking and pointing to, just bad actors from Uber and other companies. But I think that and it got a lot of pushback actually online because people point out, I think rightfully so, this isn't really a case of sexism. It's more, in those cases it was a bad culture in many cases, like with Uber, or a toxic culture, and I certainly wouldn't condone that. But this is criminal. I mean, like what happened here is there's actual criminality, allegedly.
Well, the sexism argument also just doesn't work in this case because her partner, who is a man, is also being charged with the exact same thing, right?
Yeah. Quickly want to mention onto the return to office debate, big tech continuing to operate under the assumption that their employees are going back to the office in one form or another. Google just shelled out $2.1 billion to buy a former freight terminal on the west side of Manhattan, a building the company's already leasing. It is far and away the most expensive commercial real estate deal of the COVID era and one of the priciest ever. Facebook, Apple, Amazon, they've also been snatching up office space in New York City and other cities, even as their big corporate tenants like banks have been downsizing their office footprints. I'm finding this fascinating, Carlo.
Yeah, me too. I am too. It used to be really important to watch what the banks do when it comes to this kind of thing, like real estate deals. It's now the tech companies that are really increasingly influential in this space. And there's been a lot of good writing lately on the work from home debate. Ed Zitron, he has a newsletter. He's like a PR guy. He's very anti-office, but he makes some pretty intriguing arguments. He's also written in The Atlantic, and Derek Thompson, also The Atlantic, has sort of been taking the other side. I have a lot of of different thoughts on this stuff. I don't even really know where I stand, right? I mean, part of me argues that, like, if your presence is not necessary to do your job, then by definition you should be able to work from home, for the rest of time if you want. But I also understand that, there are things about the office that are important that we're missing out on, or I'm at least missing out on being home right now. So it's hard, it's complicated, right? It's also important for these financial hubs and cities to get their people back. That's finally starting to happen in Manhattan, but it can't really happen soon enough.
I'm finding that the longer we go, the harder it is in terms of being remote, in terms of productivity and just the quality of work, because there's turnover at every company. We're now working with people who we've never met in person, right? Like you and I are able to have a good rapport. Look, I think our podcast is better when we could do it in person. I think you and I work better and have more ideas when you're in the office and I'm in the office and we can chit chat and brainstorm stuff. But you and I at least have a familiarity with each other. We worked together for a long time before we went remote. Now there's a lot of people. This isn't like a Cheddar thing. This is across the board that people are now working. There's new hires. People have left, and you've never met a lot of your colleagues, and so you don't have that kind of workflow and rapport with them already.
It's crazy how there are people now who have gotten hired and left jobs without you meeting them, right? Your colleagues. You don't even know, it's like they just vanish into thin air.
And quickly, sorry, if you have an iPhone or an iPad, Apple should now push the new iOS software update to your device. The iOS 15, not a complete redesign of the mobile operating system. It does have some handy new features. The address bar on Safari is now on the bottom of the screen, rather than the top, which makes it easier to use with just your thumb. You can also send a FaceTime link to someone, even if they don't have an Apple device, making that video call feature more like Zoom. Plus, the iPhone camera can now capture words and convert them into text that can be edited. That's very cool. Have you done this yet? I haven't.
Have you updated?
I need to download it.
So the Safari thing, it's really tricky when you use the browser now, because you're forced to use it with the address bar on the bottom. So it takes some getting used to. The weather app also has been updated and will show you more detailed forecasts, which is something that I think a lot of people have been looking for a long time. They've simplified the notification screen, so when you wake up, it's not just this like overwhelming scroll, like endless scroll of notifications, which I don't know if anyone else has that problem, but I do because I get a ton of news notifications. And this from the Wall Street Journal yesterday, Apple also working on ways to diagnose depression and cognitive decline just based on
Wow.
how a user interacts with their phone, using sort of sensor data from their mobility, their physical activity, their sleep patterns, and their typing behavior. So that'll be ethically fraught, I'm sure, but also just shows you this brave new world, right?
All right, we're going to leave it there. That is what you need to know for Wednesday, September 22nd.
See you guys tomorrow.